Today, meeting to order. Tracy, do we have a quorum?
Just a moment here, Luis will calculate that.
Thank you, Tracy. I see that we have a quorum, so we'll go ahead and move forward. So with that, just the first item up is going to be I'm going to ask for your vote to approve today's agenda. Do I have a motion?
It's Rudy with Waukee. I'll move the motion.
Serves, I'll second.
Thank you, Madeline and Rudy. This being a virtual meeting, we're not going to all vote in confirmation. We're just going to ask if there's anyone who does not agree. Is there anyone who does not agree with moving forward with this agenda? Thank you. Motion passes. Next up, I'm going to ask for your approval of the meeting minutes. Note that amended meeting minutes were sent out. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve, Mark from Ankeny.
Thank you, Mark.
Rudy with Waukee seconds.
Thank you, Rudy. Anyone wanting to discuss or vote against approval of the March 7th minutes? With that, we'll consider those approved. Next up, I'm going to ask Zach to give us a presentation update on the water trails.
Thanks, Luis. We have representatives from Icon Water Trails as well as Snyder today to provide an update on the water trails. I believe the Icon reps will give you kind of an overview of where the water trails project is at a whole for the region. And then Snyder is on to give an update on the construction progress being made at Scott Avenue Dam. So I will turn it over to the water trails folks. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Zach. I appreciate that. I have a few slides to share with you, but first let me introduce myself. So my name is Dr. Stephanie Apple. I serve as the Executive Director of Icon Water Trails. Came into this position just over 6 months ago, so still learning. But one thing I know for sure is how grateful I am for the MPO and for all of our member communities in all the great work that they have done to get us to this point. So I'm not sure if I can advance these or perfect. So just as a reminder, I know this group has probably talked about water trails in the past, but just wanted to put up for you. You know, we are really working to connect water communities and people. We are focusing on, you can see this list of priorities on the left side of the slide. But first and foremost, of course, safety. So how can we improve safety along the water trails? Mitigating or modifying those low head dams is a huge piece, but also just making sure that we are educating and advocating for safe engagement of folks with the water trails. We are an economic development and workforce traction initiative as well. I'll share a little bit about a study that we did recently that I think has got some really great information in it. Of course, we are promoting outdoor recreation as a tourist opportunity, but also as great outdoor recreation activity to improve mind, body, spirit for folks who live in the community. And then, of course, environmental conservation is a component of everything that we are doing. We have water quality and conservation best practices incorporated into all of the Icon infrastructure projects. So very excited about that and really glad to partner with the Great Outdoors Foundation in support of their mission and also just our other partners in that conservation work. Next slide. Okay, so Scott Avenue. This is the rendering that you'll see of Scott. So if you remember, this project has a couple of whitewater features and a cascading drop in the middle. There's that great habitat channel. And then we are doing some modifications to the dam also to safe it and also to make it passable for kayaks and canoes. If you want to advance to the next slide, this is a picture from a few weeks ago of some work happening out there. And to give us more of a detailed update on the construction, I'm going to turn it over to Gabe Nelson with Snyder. I think he's on.
Thanks, Stephanie. So can I share my screen? Host is disabled, participant screen sharing. So anyway, if that's
I'm working on it, Gabe.
possible.
Just give me 1 second.
Okay, sounds good. So yeah, so what you're looking at right there is the cascading drop in the middle of the river. In a second here, I'll put up a plan sheet. You can kind of see the overall view of the site and what we're working on. The contractor is here, I'll try to share here. Okay, are people seeing a big plan sheet in the screen here?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. So you kind of saw the rendering of the site. What we're looking at here is overall site. This would be the north bank of the river, levee on both sides. Currently, the city of Des Moines has raised their levee on the north side of the river and completed that process. What you're looking at is this is a maintenance path down to a cascading drop. This is the habitat channel, new fish passage in the middle of the river. And this is where all the recreation happens, and we're stabilizing the entire south bank. And also, this is the Scott Avenue Dam, doing some work to the Scott Avenue Dam as well. At this time, the entire maintenance path, this embankment's been put in. We're working on the cascading drop, and we've done quite a bit to the dam. So in a second here, when you see some pictures, you'll see a big cofferdam in the middle of the river. That's about this size, about half of the river, to kind of give you a little bit of scale. If you're seeing this move forward, so this is what the site looks like as of today. The river came up late last week with all the rains early in the week, and they actually allowed the cofferdam to flood out. They didn't want the river to come up enough that it was coming over the cofferdam and damaging what we had already had in. River peaked about Friday, so they plan on pumping this down again. So this hasn't been up for very long, so it shouldn't slow us down too much. But here is a better picture. This is actually Monday, if you want to know how much things change around here. So what you're seeing, so I kind of sketched out that large cofferdam. That is half of the river. Contractor is working on this cascading drop. That's a series of these rocks are fairly large, like at least 18-inch in each direction. And they build a series of 7 steps, so the water will kind of cascade over top of it. We have also, so this is the entire dam. 6 of the 8 spans of the dam have had a step placed on the dam, and that prevents that kind of rolling action that's very dangerous and kind of sucks you down as you go over the dam and drowns people. That dam or that step has been constructed on 6 of the 8 spans, so the step's actually completed. This 3rd span is actually the one that gets cut down. We have not done that. That's the span you'll kayak through. And then this span gets cut down as well, and a new fish passage is added. You can kind of see the old fish passage that was constructed in the 30s. We will fill that in, and actually the fish passage will be this entire span. kind of moving forward a little more. So this is a kind of a better picture of one of the steps of the cascading drop. The first step is actually 2 steps are complete at this time. This picture is a little old. These are actually under drains that you see it's kind of sticking out a little bit. They get trimmed off. You won't actually see those, but that's a way to equalize the pressure under the steps. So that's what those are. And then this is as of last Monday. So the first 2 steps are basically completed. They actually grout these in place, so nothing can ever move once they get it in place. So they're going to kind of grout this as they go, but they're working on the 3rd step right now. They'll get all of this grouted, and then they'll continue working their way up to the top. Let's see here. This is, I don't know how well you can see this online, but this is actually the completed step. So this is what prevents that rolling action over the dam that kind of sucks you down there. As of last week, since the water came up, one of the good things of that is we were actually able to test these out, and it does stop that kind of that hydraulic rolling action that is so dangerous with these dams. And then this is just a shot of the southeast bank. So when you kind of look at this picture right here, you're in this area at the very southeast part of the project. As we move closer to the wreck drops, we'll place a bunch of boulders and we'll grout them in place and stuff like that. But what you're seeing here is that very southeast bank. And what we do is we place a bunch of riprap on the bank, and then we actually vibrate river sand into the voids. So it becomes like it looked like a beach, but it kind of gets kind of rock hard to make it a little more stand up to the higher flows, and hopefully most of the sand will stay there, but you'll still be able to walk down it into the river with that. So that's all I really had for a construction update. Contractor is continuing to work. It'll continuing to work over this year, and actually the entire project in the river won't be done until next summer. And then we're actually letting an uplands project separately, which will do most of the improvements on the south bank. So most of that construction happens next year as well. Any questions for me?
Okay, thanks, Gabe.
Thanks.
So in addition to our Scott site, we also have the Harriet site, which is downstream from that, not this image. And that will start construction here very soon. April was their official start, so that will be underway soon. And that project will be completed yet this year, but since it's the takeout for Scott, we won't really have as much of an impact there, but there's some great conservation practices happening down there as well. What you're seeing right now is our Fleur Drive site. This is sort of a concept map. We are in the design process. We are going to hit 30% design and be able to look at those plans about 2 weeks from now. So as you can imagine, so where you're looking at kind of where this donut chart is, that's where the Coleman Bridge would be. On the south bank here, opposite that would be Grace Lake. So this is kind of that wooded peninsula there at the curve right next to Fleur. So upstream from this, there is a Des Moines Waterworks dam that is part of the infrastructure to support drinking water. So we are working very closely with the Des Moines Waterworks, as well as the city of Des Moines, and then Polk County Conservation that will eventually take over the land ownership for this peninsula area on the design of this. So more to come, but this one will soon have design completed and be into permitting. And then we'll move into construction. Our grand opening for this one is slated for the spring of 27. Next slide. Just wanted to show you again a map. Icon Water Trail sites are those white with red circle dots, and then also the black dots. The ones that are those red and white are our currently active sites. So there are 15 active sites presently. And I want to share that with you as a reminder that Water Trails is up and rolling. There are some improvements to some of these sites that will happen as time goes on. So you'll see that happening. For example, one of them, there is a site up at Birdland by Captain Roy's. But as we know, there's a significant initiative to do improvements over there. Icon is part of that. So we'll be excited to see some of those improvements. If you go to the next slide for me. I show you those active sites because I wanted to talk a little bit about an economic impact study that we recently released. So during the 2022 recreation season, so think of a 6-month period between April and October of 2022, we had some analysis done to look at what the visitorship looked like, and then what the impacts of that visitorship were. So using cell phone data pings, we were able to identify that there were more than 250,000 visits to Icon's 15 access points during that time frame. As you can see here, that resulted in $11 million in direct spending for a total economic output of $20 million. Supporting more than 110 jobs with a significant amount of wages and taxes. So one of the things that was great to see, we had a good mix of local and non-local visitors, and we saw some really nice spending profiles out of those two. So folks who were local, that they lived within 10 miles of one of those access points, they spent about $25 associated with their visit. Those non-local who traveled more than 10 miles to visit, which we might still consider that local, but in Parks and Rec terms, that's kind of the delineation. Those folks spent around $86 associated with their visit. So we know that Icon Water Trails are already having an impact on the community. Next slide. So beyond that direct economic impact, there is a significant value to recreators. So non-market benefits, this is like the value that recreators see above and beyond their direct spending. So the figure that was associated with this is around 12.7 million, and just under 17 million was the estimated reduction in healthcare costs. So improved physical, mental, and emotional well-being from being out and recreating. So we think that's really valuable and important, knowing how impacted our healthcare system is right now. We've seen that benefit is directly impactful both for us and for that industry. Next slide. So overall, we have strong visitor engagement. We think that that is really critical, and we will continue to grow that. I talked a little bit with you about the local and non-local dynamics and the economic multipliers. We want to make sure that we're sharing this with folks because it does have policy implications, and how we can continue to advocate for the work of the water trails with folks as people are making decisions on different policies at the local and state and federal level. And then again, that there are all of these benefits over and above that direct spending is really key to understanding how Icon is really working to meet those overall objectives that I shared with you in the beginning. So I think that's all I had with my slides. There might be one that just says thank you, but yeah, so that's Icon. Any questions for me? Okay, if anybody ever has a question, Gabe and I are always around, so reach out to us. Zach and Dylan know how to get a hold of us. So thanks for your time, and thanks for letting us share an update on Icon with you this morning.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie and Gabe. We appreciate that update. So next up, item 5, we have another presentation, this one about the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan update. And Zach, I think you're going to kick us off.
Yes, thank you. As you may recall, last year the MPO received an $800,000 grant, a Safe Streets and Roads for All grant, to complete a comprehensive safety action plan. And the purpose of this plan was really just to look at the region as a whole, and look at safety issues across the region and how we might address it and have safer roads across the region. So in the fall, the MPO hired Tool Design to complete this comprehensive safety action plan. And today we have a couple of different representatives from Tool Design to provide us with an overview of the planning activities that have happened to date and to give us a little bit of an update on some crash-related data and findings that they have to share with us. So I will turn it over to Tool to introduce themselves and provide us with that update.
Thank you, Zach. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mitzi Alex, and I'm with Tool Design. I'm the project manager for this project and super excited to be working with HR Green, HDR, and Confluence as well. It's a big region, big project, and we're just excited to be part of it. Today, we have Tarek Shehata and Omar Peters here, who will be sharing some of the crash analysis findings that have already come out of this project. And before I hand it off, I just want to make a plug for sidewalk inspection and repair programs. I unintentionally became a live billboard for this message over the weekend as I met a sidewalk that was in disrepair. So for all of you who have roles in sidewalk inspection and repair programs, I'll give a plug for that. So Tarek, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you. Good morning. All right, I'm going to try to share my screen here. Make sure I choose the right one. Okay, there we go. Okay, let me know if you cannot see my screen here. I also want to note my colleague Omar Peters also here this morning. We'll be hearing a bit from him as we get into questions, if questions do come up, but I'll go ahead and get us kicked off here. So my name is Tarek Shehata. I'm representing Tool Design, leading the safety analysis, the data-based safety analysis component of this planning effort. So quick, a couple slides introducing the project itself, and then we'll get right into the fun part, the findings of the analyses. And so what we are working on here is a development of a comprehensive safety action plan. So through grant funding received by the MPO, through the SS4A planning grant, we've had the opportunity to work with DMAMPO and stakeholders to begin this development, to begin analyzing from a policy perspective and now from a data perspective, focusing on eliminating fatal and serious injury crashes. We'll call that FSI crashes moving forward. So just so that you know what that means, FSI, fatal and serious injury. So one of the key components of this process here is identifying key safety needs across the region and mapping those needs, whether they be crash-based, based on historical patterns of crashes, or sort of proactive opportunities to improve safety as well, based on identified risk for future crashes. Taking those findings and mapping them to policy as well as infrastructure safety opportunities. And so here we are sort of identifying those needs, and moving forward in the project, we will begin that process of mapping those needs to hopefully solutions as well. Also, crucial part of this planning process is activating the implementation grant opportunity for the MPO as well. There's a large pot of funds at the federal level for implementation of strategies, policies, and infrastructure strategies identified in these plans. And so by developing a comprehensive and compliant plan through this process, we'll be able to help the MPO to access some of those funds as well, hopefully. A quick look at sort of the overall arc of the project here. A number of different steps, from stakeholder engagement to analysis to review of the state of the practice, and to ultimately developing the plan and working towards that grant. We're sort of in this bottom left area here. We've got a lot of work left to do throughout, but you know, we're moving forward effectively and quickly. But we're sort of in that crash data analysis stage, and that's sort of what we're talking about here today, at the very least. All right, into the fun stuff here, talking about crash trends overview, something we also call descriptive safety analysis. So a note on the goals of this analysis, what we should be looking out for, and what we would love to have, you know, the team's eyes on here today as we work through this. Primarily, we're attempting to create a shared understanding of safety throughout the region. This is a process of us studying what we are able to learn, as well as sharing what we have learned with community members, with stakeholders, with folks like you on the call today. We're also trying to describe current safety conditions, and so there's a lot of data that we can look at and that we can begin to synthesize into you know, concrete understandings of sort of a baseline for safety that we can begin to work off of, as well as beginning to tell the story of safety in the area. That becomes, you know, somewhat important. I think that it's something that we've learned that the, you know, federal agencies are really looking for in those implementation grants, is a compelling story and a compelling community-wide story as well. One more quick note on context here. You know, the MPO represents a pretty diverse area. We've got plenty of urban space as well as rural space. And so we're making that delineation for the purposes of this project because it's important to note that there's going to be very different behaviors and types of trips in these different areas. Rural and urban roads tend to serve different sort of forms of trips, and that comes through in safety, as we'll sort of find as we move forward through the data. Also checking on the sort of state of safety over time. We'll see a little bit of that. We're looking at the most recent 5 years of crash data that we have, 2018 through 2022. And also recognizing that data doesn't tell the full story. And so this is one part of our sort of analysis of the current state of safety. But there will be a lot more, and a lot of that looks like engagement and sort of filling in the gaps of what the data tells us. Okay. So quick, few high level numbers here. So from 2018 through 2022, there were over 50,000 total crashes in the area. 939 of those involved a fatality or a serious injury. That's FSI, like we were talking about. Serious injury, we generally qualify as an incapacitating injury, an injury that an individual will not be able to necessarily fully recover from, at least in the short term. That involved 168 actually crashes that were indeed fatal. So of those FSI crashes, 576 of them involved exclusively motorists. 215 of them did involve motorcycles. 119 involved pedestrians, and 29 involved bicyclists. A lot of data on this slide here, but I want to call your attention to sort of where these lines are moving. The columns are representing total crashes of all severities, but as we're sort of focusing on these higher severity crashes, let's look at these lines here. That top more blue line, and we see sort of the trend line running through it, represents the urban area FSI crashes. And we do in fact see a slight increase over time in that number. And it's a little bit noisy, and we'll see actually in 2022, there was a sizable drop. This is something that we've consistently seen across the nation due to COVID. And then subsequently a large increase in 2021 as things sort of came back online and shifted. But on the whole, you know, we're certainly not moving downwards, at least. And so that really sort of begins to kick us into gear. We're sort of seeing the same thing in the rural area, in this black line down here. Not a whole, you know, the numbers aren't huge, and so it's tough to draw too much of a conclusion from that, but we know that we are seeing some of the highest numbers in recent years, in fact, compared to previous years. Moving forward here, again, looking at the urban versus rural distinction, looking specifically at this sort of orange sliver and the dark blue sliver on the left end of both of these sets of columns here. Noting that, in fact, rural area crashes do tend to be higher severity. We're seeing higher speeds on these roads often, and in a lot of cases, we'll see in a later figure as well, these tend to be single vehicle crashes where, you know, involving a run off the road incident, which can be high severity and commonly involve, a rollover or a collision with a fixed object, which can be very damaging. Also looking at the breakdown of severity by mode, we'll see here, and this is common to see for motor vehicle crashes, they actually tend to be quite low severity on average. And so about 99% of motor vehicle only crashes do not involve a serious or fatal injury. Now, if we look at the more vulnerable modes, like pedestrians over here on the right, nearly a quarter of those crashes actually result in a fatal or incapacitating serious injury. Similar for motorcycles, perhaps operating at higher speeds and perhaps in more rural environments where there are fewer safety guardrails, as it were. And then bicyclists similarly as well, but to a slightly lesser degree. A little bit dependent sort of on the context of those bicycle trips. But still relative to motorists, extremely high severity levels on average. Now, this is a figure that I often like to sort of ponder about here. This is a good one. It sort of talks about the context of the trips being taken. The better we can understand the trips being taken, the more effectively we can understand how to potentially protect them. So we're looking at day of week on the left, time of day on the top. And so, in fact, in this red box here, we're sort of highlighting essentially commuter trips, evening commute. The AM commuting period is seemingly significantly resulting in significantly fewer crashes compared to the evening commute, where we're seeing relatively large densities, 45 total crashes where someone was killed or seriously injured during this PM commute on Thursdays. We're also seeing here sort of very early mornings, Saturdays and Sundays, sort of representing that those trips that are being taken late nights on weekends, in the late night hours into the early mornings of the following day. Fundamentally very different trips between what's happening over here in this first red box and what's happening in that second red box. And so understanding the distinction in those types of trips and our abilities to impact them, that'll be very important as we begin to understand what we can do to improve safety. Lighting conditions now. Perhaps unsurprisingly, in rural areas, looking at this sort of reddish box here, about a quarter of the crashes are happening in dark, unlit conditions. In rural environments, we just tend to have less lighting overall. In the urban environment, this dark blue box is dark. Crashes are happening in dark conditions where there is lighting. And so the unlit conditions are less prominent, though there is still a fair portion of these FSI crashes happening in unlit conditions. But really in that that rural environment, we're seeing a significant overrepresentation of unlit crashes, representing certainly a challenging safety concern. The relation between crash mode and crash location. So we're seeing a pretty even split across all modes, red being the intersection, crashes that are happening essentially at or very close to an intersection. Motorists and motorcycles, so cars and motorcycles, having a greater likelihood to be crashing along segments, whereas VRUs, vulnerable road users, that involves pedestrians and bicyclists in this case, much more likely that the crashes occur at intersections, representing an issue with conflicts at these intersections and potentially opportunities to improve facilities for walkers, bikers, rollers at these intersections to ensure that they have opportunity to pass safely. Collision manner, about 46% of our FSI crashes are single vehicle. And so, commonly in situations where we're seeing significant levels of congestion consistently, there would be perhaps a higher likelihood of more multi-vehicle crashes, but in fact, close to half of our crashes are single vehicle, often involving fixed objects, roadway departures and things like that. Many of those, I'm sure, in rural contexts as well. You can sort of slice that a couple different ways. VRU actions, and so bicyclist or pedestrian actions, entering or crossing a roadway. And this sort of matches with that slide that we saw before of where those crashes are occurring, many of them at intersections, 65% of those ped and bike crashes are involving entering or crossing a roadway. And so that could be at an intersection or at a mid-block location that is perhaps uncontrolled and has no crossing facility. But nonetheless, there's a need or a demand for these vulnerable road users to cross streets that is perhaps not being served currently by existing facilities. Unsafe behaviors. This is another feature that is reported in the crash reports. And so this is based on police reported information. Speeding, failure to lead, and run off road are sort of those three top behaviors, and more so those top two, in fact. Speeding, very prevalent in urban environments, somewhat prevalent in rural environments as well, and the context of each of those would perhaps impact the types of speeds that motorists are driving at, or what speeds would be considered safe. Failure to yield, not surprisingly, that's more of an issue in an urban environment where there's a lot more controlled intersections. Runoff road tends to be higher in rural environments, not too surprising there. In many cases, narrow two-lane roads, and those are some of our single vehicle crashes as well. A number of other different types of behaviors in here as well, such as running stop signs or signals, as well as erratic driving. Quick look at number of lanes, and a bit tough to chew on exactly what's happening here, but let me point out sort of the key takeaway here. 21% of our crashes are occurring on roads with 4 to 5 lanes. So these are our multi-lane roads, even though those roads only represent about 4% of the mileage across the MPO. And that's showing a bit of an overrepresentation there. That's due to higher, traffic volumes on those roads, certainly, but also generally a higher number of conflicts at intersections. There's a lot more movements crossing one another and a lot more sort of complicated environment, driving environment. We also tend to see that vulnerable road users have a much more difficult time crossing these multi-lane roads as well. Now, talking about some demographic components, we often see, to some degree, an overrepresentation of male drivers in crash data. This is quite a high overrepresentation here in the MPO, where about 67% of FSI crashes involve a male driver, compared to 33% for other genders. And sort of similarly here, looking at the age groups, notably here, and this is again sort of a common piece that we'll see, this red box over here representing the percent of fatal and serious injury crashes involving 15 to 24-year-olds, so our younger, our newer drivers, compared to that demographic only representing about 12% of the population in the region. So that's a strong overrepresentation, indicating an opportunity to improve, educational strategies and other policies that can help us to protect those drivers at that age. Okay, talked through a lot of figures and sort of a lot of concepts there, but I'd like to just wrap that up in a couple of key takeaways here. So notably, rural areas have a higher percentage of serious crashes. We saw that a lot of single vehicle crashes as well, in many cases higher speed crashes, where running off the road is sort of a common cause. Additionally, we noted late nights on weekends, as well as dark conditions throughout the weekends, and those commuting hours as well. Also noted that in rural environment, and many of those crashes are happening in unlit conditions. Crashes involving motorcycles and pedestrians have a higher likelihood of resulting in a serious injury or a fatality. About half of VRU crashes, those bike and ped crashes, occurred at an intersection. And of those VRU crashes, many, 65% involved entering or crossing a roadway at an intersection or at a mid-block location. Speeding and failure to lead were the two biggest sort of behavioral components that we saw. And then demographically, males and younger drivers were notably overrepresented in the data as well. sort of simplifying those down to a quick bullet point list there. And then I want to make a quick note of sort of what's next. This is sort of our first stage of the safety analysis. We currently have ongoing an equity analysis, trying to understand the impacts of equity and socioeconomics, the different experiences from a disadvantaged perspective that communities are experiencing and how that correlates with safety outcomes. We're also mapping these types of insights to specific locations. We're producing maps sort of similar to what we're seeing on the right there, just as an example, where we are identifying those locations with a high number of historical crashes, as well as a high-risk network. This is what we call a systemic safety analysis or a risk-based analysis, where we're understanding the roadway features as well as contextual features that correlate with higher probability of crashes, trying to get ahead of next crashes and sort of identifying locations which may not have had a crash in recent years, but which might be expected to have crashes in the future. So a little bit of a look at what's ahead there. Now, I will sort of end with that and open up my team here to questions if there are any that come up. And, you know, there's a lot that's we've talked through here, and feel free to, you know, digest it. And I know that we'll also be available for questions after the meeting as well if they come up. But Mitzi, I see you've unmuted, so I'll kick it to you.
Thank you. It was a great presentation. I just want to note that John Davis did put something in the chat related to the 2023 crash data, and also a suggestion that we look at a third street context category or something that would be more suburban. My understanding is that the 2023 crash data had a date in which it was preliminarily available, but not validated yet. And I don't know when that date is, when it becomes validated, but I'm wondering if you might be able to speak to either of those two items.
Sure, yeah, happy to speak to that. And I appreciate the comment, John. Thank you for that. Yeah, 2023 crash data is definitely this is sort of one of the first steps that we took in initializing this analysis, is seeing what the most recent 5 years of complete crash data are. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get our hands on that most recent complete year of crash data. There's a number of sort of cleanup and confirmation processes that the crash data goes through. So I think we're seeing 2018 through 2022. I think we were pretty pleased with that range, because it gives us a good sense of sort of the before and after COVID conditions. Having that most recent year would be a great addition, but unfortunately, it just wasn't going to be ready in time for us to begin the analysis here. As far as the third street context category, I think that's a great note. Commonly, we'll break it out by rural versus urban for this sort of high level initial analysis. But as we move forward with the rest of the analyses, we'll be taking into account some additional contextual features related to demographics, related to equity, things like zero vehicle households or modal preference and active transportation demand and things like that. They can help us to get a little bit more of a nuance on the certainly the land use context is not a binary of rural versus urban, and there's more nuance that we can get to in there. That's something that we will be exploring a bit further. I know that we are working on some sort of geographic breakdown of the region as well, to help us better capture those distinctions.
John, go for it.
Yeah, I guess.
Fortunately, we can't hear you, John. Feel free to keep typing. Well, John might be having some connection issues. Can I ask the team to just follow up directly with him and make sure that we get his comment? Are there other comments from the committee? Questions? Well, thank you very much for this update. Looks like you guys are making a lot of progress, and we certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, our pleasure. Thank you so much for making the time for us.
So next up, item 6, report and vote on the carbon reduction program funding recommendation. Carl?
Yes, thank you. So the carbon reduction program is a bipartisan out of the bipartisan infrastructure law and aims at reducing transportation related emissions. The MPO currently has about $9.1 million in the CRP funds that we are able to award, and we have previously been targeting our LRTP to once to be completed to strategically award these funds. Last year, next slide, but last year we submitted a regional grant for the charging and fueling infrastructure program that unfortunately was not awarded, and these funds would have gone to fund about 150 EV charging locations, level 2 charging stations in the metro at about a $4 million price tag. So staff is suggesting that we use the CRP funds to fund that $4 million request and get those EV charging stations started in the region so that we aren't lagging behind other regions. So we are interested to hear what the technical committee thinks and then provide a recommendation to the funding subcommittee.
Carl, would you mind reminding us, just in broad strokes, where these charging stations would be located, like public property, private property?
So these would all be
would operate and
publicly,
maintain?
yeah, so these would all be publicly available charging. They were primarily located in land that the cities already owned, or Polk County as well. And they would all be publicly available charging stations that may or may not come in at a cost for the energy to the user.
So we're talking about things like parks and city halls, things like that?
Correct. You have the trailheads, you have locations just like that.
Okay.
Carl, are you proposing it would be the same local cost share then using this new funding source?
Yes, that's correct. There'd still be a 20% local match from each municipality going after the funding.
And then is there a time sensitivity to approving this now versus waiting till the LRTP update comes out?
No, I don't believe so. I think it's just something that we're trying to move forward. So I think there's not much of a time sensitivity at this point. There's been a bit of pressure just saying, hey, like, we want these chargers from our communities, so we're trying to find a way to get these funded.
This is Dylan. I think the only thing that really is driving to put this on the agenda is the funding subcommittee. This would move on to the funding subcommittee, then the policy committee. The funding subcommittee is meeting around this time of year anyway for the normal funding subcommittee, SDBG allocations. So that's really the only reason we put it on here now. It doesn't have to be done right now. We can reconvene that committee another time when everybody's comfortable moving forward.
I think one of my hesitations is just that the proportion of the total amount is pretty high to go toward this project, and I would just really want to make sure that it aligns with the region's priorities. And I just worry a little bit that, the charging and fueling infrastructure application, we went after it for these chargers because that's what it was, versus looking more broadly at all the things that could be applied for with this funding. I would just really want to make sure that these are the regional priorities. So, I don't know if you could speak more to that in terms of how this would rate relative to other regional priorities that are going to come out in the LRTP.
Dylan, do you have an answer for that?
I'm not entirely sure yet. Zach might want to chime in too, since he's been leading on the LRTP, but We're just in the process now of, we just had the closing of getting all the projects from the communities. And so we're still kind of combing through those and seeing what comes out of it, though. I think in talking with Zach, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know that we have another silver bullet that could be used for these funds. Obviously, it can be used for about anything that gets at air quality and climate reduction, emissions reduction. So it could go for EV charging, it could go for transit, it could go for more bike ped facilities, it could go for kind of anything we use in our system optimization. It's just we have to, we get to decide what we collectively with this committee of the MPO gets to decide. It's pretty open-ended. Just given the interest in EV charging, when we put this together, we thought that was something that everyone kind of rallied around. So it might make sense. But that said, we're willing to hear other ideas. And I don't know that we have anything yet, though, that we'd be proposing in place of this.
I would just agree with what Dylan said. And as far as projects that have been submitted so far in LRTP, we have not had a chance to dig deep enough into those yet to really fully understand how potential projects that were submitted might stack up to spending this money on EV chargers.
Does the committee have any feelings on moving this forward, including, even a partial? Because I totally recognize that there's a need there. For me, the thing that stands out is just the proportion of what's available, is doing that before we have the bigger picture.
I agree with Luisa's comment about making sure that this is the regional priority versus just a available solution. That I don't know, Pleasant Hill was participating in the CFI grant. We had 2 applications. I'm not sure this is what funding situations have changed, budgets have changed. I'm not sure this is even what our local priority would still be to provide the local match if we still need to do that moving forward. And so I think it may be beneficial to reach back out to those individual communities that participated in that original to see if they want to be included in this next phase. But yeah, I'm not sure that this would be what our priority is for using that other funding yet either, without knowing the bigger regional context.
This is Rudy with Waukee. I would echo Madeline's comments there. Probably some more evaluation at the locals on priority levels would be warranted from my perspective.
Any others, especially from those who had been part of that application? So I think I'm going to ask staff to just take this one back and do a little bit more homework on right sizing what the ask is based on that local interest.
Okay.
Does that
Yeah,
sound
we
like a plan?
Yep, we can absolutely do that. Yeah, thank you for the feedback.
Thank you. Next up, we have item 7, report and vote on the pavement conditions data collection. Dylan, I think this one's yours.
I can take this. And again, this is kind of driven by, like I said, the funding subcommittee meeting later this week, and then making our recommendation on STBG funds for the FY 2028 cycle. To back up a little bit, the Iowa DOT conducts its pavement collection on a 4-year basis, but there's an option to opt in to collect on every 2 years, on an every 2-year basis. So we're coming up on that. And the Iowa DOT has asked whether we want to do that again in this off cycle that's coming up. We had done this previously, 2 years ago, whenever it was that this question came up. An updated cost, I think last time we did this, it was a little under $300,000. Right now, the estimated cost from the DOT is that it'd be about $340,000. Partially just because costs have gone up, partially because we've now included all of Polk County into the MPO planning area boundary. But if there's a desire to do this on the off-peak, that $340,000 would just come off the top of the 2028 SDBG allocation that we've been provided from the DOT. So it wouldn't cost, communities wouldn't have to pay directly for this. This would be something that would come off the top of that. All the communities would get that data, and then you can use it for your pavement management systems that you do locally. The MPO would be able to use that for the pavement management work that we do. Question we have for you, though, is this worth it? Is this something we want to opt into again? We'd like your feedback, and we can have a discussion if we need to.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know how this information is being used by locals.
This is Rudy with Waukee. It's being used for our pavement management planning as well as our CIP planning. We actually just went through updating that and updating our DTIMS software specific for Waukee streets. So I see value at a local level to get this data every 2 years. That'd be my input.
This is Mark from Ankeny, and we support doing this additional data collection just because similar to what Rudy said, just the payment management program that we've got, we're seeing a downward trend in the last few years of our payment condition, and to wait 4 years for another set of data we think is too long. And as we see those trends, that helps us, get additional funding for pavement improvements for the city. So I think we see value.
I think to add to Mark's comments there, it also helps staff explain that downward trend to our elected officials and understand the financial situation that communities can be if they are not addressed appropriately, if funding levels aren't elevated to combat that downward cycle.
This is John with Altoona, and I just agree with Rudy and Mark on their assessment of the need for this. It does help us answer the question of where to put the limited funding.
This is Steve, Des Moines. I agree with John, Rudy, and Mark, and I guess hearing, following that, I guess I'd like to make a motion to for the funding subcommittee to continue using the funding to pay for the pavement data. So
Thank you for that motion, Steve. Do we have a second?
Mark with Ankeny will second.
Thank you, Mark. We have a motion and a second. Is anyone with concerns they want to vote against this motion? Hearing none, the motion passes. We appreciate staff bringing this forward. It sounds like it's going to have a lot of value for everybody.
Thank you.
Next up, we have item 8, a report on the federal fiscal year 25 to 28 Transportation Improvement Program development. Zach?
Yes, thank you. Just a quick update. Staff has begun the process of developing the 25 through 28 TIP. As part of that, we will be sending out status reports to each community. We'd ask that you review those reports, make sure that all of your project information is entered correctly. If you have any projects that are not going to be let prior to September 30th, we'll need to roll those in 25. So let's want you to make note of that. We will be sending these status reports out through email, probably towards the end of the week. I think we'll try to include the funding subcommittee's recommended projects on there as well, with a note that those will just be recommended at this time and won't be finalized until policy can vote on them. But would like to include those on there just in case any member governments want to move any of those funds around. So just be on the lookout for those going out probably towards the end of this week. Happy to take any questions that you might have on the TIP development.
Questions for Zach? Thank you, Zach.
Thank you.
Next up, we have item 9, a report on the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program. Carl.
Yes, thank you. We just Steph want to make you aware of $45 million in a NOFO that came out for the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program. There are 2 types of awards that can be had. So there's $3 million set aside for planning and design grants. These awards would be at a minimum of $100,000 project cost. And there's also construction grants awarded, and these must be a minimum of $15 million in total construction costs. So it looks to be a very competitive grant that's available. However, staff was interested in making you aware in case there's any large active transportation projects that you're currently thinking about. There's going to be a webinar from the Federal Highway on Tuesday, April 9th at 10 a.m. and applications will be due on June 17th. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions and also happy to help with any grants that you may be going after.
So Carl, maybe I'm just confused here. There's 45 million available, but they're looking for projects of a minimum. I guess the project has to be 15 million, but their ask. Okay, $100,000 minimum asks for planning and design.
Yep. So there's a $3 million set aside for planning and design grants. So planning active transportation networks, that would be a minimum of $100,000 award. And then there's construction grants available. So it looks like they would only be able to fund 2 or 3 construction grants. So I'm guessing it's going to be very competitive for those grants, but there are 2 separate set-asides.
Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful. Any other questions for Carl?
Hey, Carl, this is Mark with the Ankeny. What is meant by active transportation infrastructure?
So anything basically besides cars, so bicycle pedestrian networks. So it broke it down into networks or spines. So this would be like a bicycle commuter corridor or something like that. So anything to increase other modes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Is transit eligible?
I can look deeper into it. I don't believe so, but I'll look deeper for you.
Thanks, Carl. Other questions? Item 10, we have a report from Z on upcoming events.
Thank you. Here are the upcoming events for the month of April. These are also included in your agenda packets. 2 things I think of note of webinars. April 23rd, there's a webinar on collaboration between land use, housing, transportation, and economic development. That seemed pretty interesting and promising. And then April 13th to the 16th, the APA National Conference will be in Minneapolis. Please have a look through the webinars and events and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Z. Item 11, other non-action items of interest to the committee.
I have one. Yep, thank you. So Jeff Von Brown over at Iowa DOT informed us of a research opportunity. So the research is part of NCHRP project 03144 led by Texas A&M Transportation Institute, looking to validate traffic volumes collected from various traffic equipment. And so if you are interested in participating, you would have to provide signal counts as well as benchmarking data, such as video recordings. There's no cost to participate if you are interested. If you do have any questions or would like to participate in this study, please email Yanni at the email on your screen.
Thank you, Z. Our next meeting date is going to be May 2nd, 2024. So if there's no other business for the committee, I'll ask for a motion and a second to adjourn.
Rudy with Waukee, I'll move that motion.
Steve with Des Moines, second.
Thank you, Rudy and Steve. Any objections? And we stand adjourned. We'll see you in about a month. Thank you.